My name is Catherine Hayes, and at the age of 64, I was told politely, of course, that my time had come. It happened on a rainy Thursday morning, the kind that makes you question whether getting out of bed was ever worth it. I remember the elevator ride to the 38th floor of Brexler Capital, vividly its quiet hum, the faint scent of stale coffee and anxiety, and the way my reflection in the polished chrome doors looked more tired than usual. When I walked into the conference room, I already knew. No one schedules a strategic realignment meeting at 8 a.m. unless they're planning to gut you. Natalie, the senior VP of strategy, was already seated at the head of the table, her iPad open like a shield. "Catherine," she said with that syrupy corporate tone, "thank you for coming in early." I smiled politely. "I've been coming in early for the last 29 years. What's another hour?" She didn't laugh. Thought there was someone from HR in the corner. I didn't recognize her. Knew that was always a bad sign. Natalie took a breath, practiced, and poised. "As you know, we're entering a new phase of digital transformation, and with that comes the need for fresh perspectives and agile leadership." Fresh, agile words that sounded suspiciously like young. "We appreciate your years of service," she continued, "but we believe the firm is best served by moving in a different direction. Effective immediately." I blinked. "I beg your pardon. We're offering you a generous severance package, and we're happy to provide a reference." I looked at her, the same woman who, 15 years ago, spilled coffee on her blouse and came crying to me before her first board presentation. The same woman I mentored, defended, and once drove home in a snowstorm because she was too scared to take the subway alone. Now, she couldn't even look me in the eye. I turned to HR. "Is this legal?" The young woman cleared her throat. "Technically, yes. The role is being dissolved, not reassigned. And my knowledge, my client relationships, they're being dissolved, too." Natalie forced a smile. "We're streamlining communication channels." I stood, slowly. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply gathered the pen I'd brought, an old Mont Blanc my late husband gave me after my first promotion, and said, "You'll regret this." Natalie's lips twitched upward. "I doubt that." "Oh, sweetheart, you really shouldn't have." I walked out of Brexler Capital without saying goodbye to anyone. Not to the interns who still asked me to review their pitch decks. Not to James in legal, who always snuck an extra donut onto my desk on Thursdays. Not even to Angela, my assistant for 10 years, who I knew would be too heartbroken to meet my eyes. I didn't want a farewell lunch, or some plastic plaque with my name misspelled. I wanted dignity, and maybe, if I'm being honest, a tiny bit of revenge, but not the kind of revenge people think about: screaming lawsuits or angry public statements. No, I wanted the kind that builds slowly, quietly, patiently, the kind that doesn't destroy others but simply reminds them who you are, and who they should have never underestimated. For 2 weeks, I stayed in my little townhouse on Ashford Lane. I baked lemon bars. I read old finance books that still smelled of ink and ambition. I watered my garden with the same precision I once reserved for quarterly earnings reports. And then, I got to work. You see, what Natalie never understood is that I didn't just work at Brexler, helped build it. When I joined in 1994, we were 8 people renting 1 floor in a crumbling midtown office with water stains on the ceiling. Back then, my job was everything: analyst, secretary, client relations, sometimes janitor. I sat in on meetings I wasn't invited to and left with ideas no one else thought of. My insights landed us our first 7-figure client. My late nights built systems that made our portfolio tracking software what it is today. But I never bragged. I let the young ones take the credit because I believed mentorship meant clearing the path, not blocking it. Natalie. Natalie was different. She had always been sharp, no doubt. But sharpness isn't the same as wisdom. Sharpness can cut, knows when not to. When she started rising through the ranks, I didn't feel threatened. I was proud. She was a woman in finance, and I knew how few of us there were. But somewhere along the way, she mistook experience for obsolescence. And so, when I got that phone call from Theo Reynolds, my old colleague, now managing partner at Vance & Baker Holdings, it felt like fate had just knocked on my door wearing a tailored suit and a pocket square. "Kathy," he said, "I heard about Brex." I have to say, I was shocked. "Were you?" I said, sipping tea in my kitchen, still in my robe. "You were the backbone of that place. Hell, you were their portfolio strategy for 2 decades. That's what I thought too." There was a pause. I could hear him flipping through something: papers, maybe. A proposal, I'll cut to the chase, he said. We're buying controlling interest in Brexler, quietly. It's in the early stages, but we want someone who knows the guts of that company better than anyone. Someone who can help us fix what they've clearly broken. I laughed nuts, a full laugh, more like a stunned breath. You want me to help buy the company that fired me? No, he said. I want you to help lead it, from the top. That was the moment the ache in my chest, the one that came from being discarded like an old chair, began to fade. Not because I wanted to get even, but because I saw something bigger, an opportunity to create something better from the ruins. I'm in, I said. And just like that, Catherine Hayes was back in the game. It started with spreadsheets because revenge, if done right, always begins with math. Theo sent over Brexler's most recent financial disclosures, internal org charts, and board-level summaries. I spent 3 days dissecting every line item like I was performing surgery. What I found didn't surprise me: bloated spending on innovation initiatives, flashy PR campaigns with no measurable return, and one particularly painful slide from a recent board meeting titled, "Modernizing Legacy Leadership." Legacy leadership. That's what they were calling people like me now. But what really made my stomach churn was the employee attrition report. In just the last 12 months, Brexler had lost 6 of their most senior analysts, all over the age of 50. One woman, Monica Del Rey, had left with 32 years of institutional knowledge and not a single thank you note. Another, Peter Dunn, had trained 3 of the firm's most profitable advisors before being pushed into consulting. It wasn't a coincidence. Natalie was replacing wisdom with shiny resumes, experience with trendy, and the numbers showed it. Client retention was down, churn was up, and their mid-tier portfolios had begun to underperform. They'd cut out the roots, and now the branches were withering. Theo and I met every Tuesday at an old cigar lounge in Tribeca that still served strong coffee and stronger opinions. He brought a team: lawyers, analysts, quiet partners who didn't like to be named but had money that moved mountains. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked one evening as we sat in a corner booth lined with dark green leather. "Going backen means putting yourself under a microscope." "I've lived under one my entire career," I replied. "But this time, I get to hold the lens." We finalized the offer by mid-July, a 53% controlling interest through a shell consortium of mid-sized investment groups, all with perfectly legitimate reasons for acquiring a stake in Brexler. Natalie wouldn't even know it was me until the ink dried. And when it did, I didn't storm in with a camera crew or a lawyer flanking me. I walked into the building I once helped build wearing my old charcoal gray suit, heels I hadn't touched in months, and the quiet confidence of a woman who'd been underestimated for the last time. Angela, my former assistant, was at the front desk, apparently demoted to reception under the new structure. When she saw me, she blinked twice. "Catherine, good morning." "Angela," I said warmly, "I have a meeting with the executive team." She stood, her voice trembling. I didn't know you were coming." "No one does," I smiled. "But they're about to." I rode the elevator to the 38th floor, alone. No security, no entourage. Just me, a leather folio under my arm. And the satisfaction of knowing the company I loved was finally coming back to people who cared. Natalie was in the middle of a presentation when I walked in. The boardroom fell silent. "Am I interrupting?" I asked. Her face drained of color. "What are you?" I set the folio on the table. "I'm Catherine Hayes, newly appointed chair of the board. Effective immediately." There was a pause. One of the partners stood and reached across the table. "Welcome back, Ms. Hayes." Natalie didn't move. She stared at me like I was a ghost who'd come to collect, but I wasn't a ghost. I was a reckoning. The meeting room was so quiet, I could hear the soft tick of the antique wall clock behind me. Natalie hadn't blinked. One of the junior partners, Jason I believe, cleared his throat. "Excuse me, Ms. Hayes, could you clarify what you just said?" I opened the folio, pulling out the signed agreement. "This is a change of control notice. As of 9 o'clock this morning, ownership of a controlling interest in Brexler Capital has transferred to a consortium led by Vance and Baker Holdings." I paused, letting my words land. "And I've been named chair of the board with immediate authority to oversee executive restructuring." Natalie's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You planned this." "No," I said gently. "You did, the day you decided that experience had an expiration date." The others shifted in their seats, their eyes moving between us. uncertain whether to side with the future or the past, forgetting that, in this case, they were one and the same. Natalie, I said, your department has underperformed for the last 3 quarters. You've had 6 formal complaints of age discrimination, and 3 high-value clients walk away citing lack of long-term vision. Care to explain? I was modernizing, she stammered, implementing necessary cultural shifts at the expense of the very people who built this company. She stood up, finally finding her voice. You're making this personal. No, I said coolly. You made it personal the moment you decided my gray hair meant I was obsolete. The boardroom door creaked open as Theo stepped inside. He didn't say a word, he didn't need to. His presence confirmed everything. I turned to the board. Effective immediately, we'll begin an internal audit of HR practices, including all forced retirements and silent terminations in the last 2 years. We will also reinstate 3 senior advisors who were improperly pushed out without due cause. I looked Natalie square in the eyes. And you, Natalie, are relieved of your duties. You'll be placed on administrative leave pending review. She sputtered. You can't just fire me. Not firing, I said. Investigating. And if you're cleared, maybe you'll get a second chance. You believe in those, don't you? The irony wasn't lost on her. She stood frozen, as if her body hadn't quite caught up with her reality. Security didn't have to be called. She walked out quietly, heels clicking down the marble hallway like a retreat drumbeat. No theatrics, no slamming doors, just a long, humiliating silence. When the door closed behind her, I sat down at the head of the table. I'll need quarterly data on all client portfolios, starting with our legacy accounts, I said. Also, someone please tell Angela she's being reinstated as executive assistant to the chair, effective immediately. A few people smiled. One even clapped, briefly. But I wasn't doing this for applause. I was doing it for everyone who'd ever been told they were past their prime, for everyone who'd been overlooked, dismissed, or replaced, not because they lacked value, but because someone else couldn't see it. And I was doing it for me, because even after being tossed aside like an old file folder, I still had work left to do. The days that followed felt like breathing new air in an old room. The company I had poured decades into was in worse shape than I'd feared. There were cracks in every floor, ethical ones, cultural ones, structural ones that no one had dared to look at too closely, most of them traced back to one dangerous philosophy. Newer means better. The first thing I did was call back the ones they'd let go. Peter Dunn, the quiet giant of our portfolio strategy team, Monica Del Rey, who had run institutional accounts with elegance and steel nerves, even Benjamin Torres, our ex-compliance chief, who had been encouraged to retire just 3 months before his pension fully vested. They all answered the phone with the same cautious tone, and they all cried when I asked them to come back. I don't care if you're 40, 60, or 75, I said. What I care about is that you know this business, you care about this place, and you've never stopped trying to make it better. Rebuilding the team wasn't just about fixing numbers, it was about fixing trust. And I wasn't just fixing the trust of my employees, I had to repair something in myself, too, because the truth was, when Natalie let me go, I had started to believe her, just a little. I'd looked in the mirror and wondered if maybe I had lost a step, if maybe I really was becoming a relic in a fast-moving world. But now, every morning I walked into that building reminded me, I wasn't outdated, I was foundational. One afternoon, as I stood by the breakroom coffee machine, yes, I still used it, even as I heard a voice behind me. I never thought I'd see you back here. It was Angela. Her voice carried that same soft steadiness that had kept me sane through market crashes, hostile clients, and 2 mergers. I wasn't sure I'd be back either, I said, handing her the extra cup I'd just poured. But life has a funny way of circling back. She took the coffee and sat with me on the worn leather couch in the lounge. You know, she said after a moment, when Natalie made me move to the front desk, she told me that legacy staff needed to transition into lower impact roles, like I was some broken printer that needed to be pushed aside. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. You deserved better, I said. Angela looked at me with tears in her eyes. We all did, but you're showing us what better looks like. I didn't say anything, just nodded and sipped my coffee, because what she said meant more than applause in a boardroom ever could. I wasn't trying to lead with vengeance. I was trying to lead with the memory of what this place used to stand for before we confused prestige with empathy, speed with substance. I had no illusions that it would be easy. Changing a company's culture is like turning an ocean liner. You don't do it with one meeting. You do it inch by inch, with the wheel tight in your grip and the wind against your face. But I was ready. I wasn't done yet. It was a Thursday afternoon when Natalie came back. Not to the boardroom, not to her office, she no longer had one, but to the building. I had asked HR to give her a choice: resign quietly with a severance and a neutral reference, or stay on in a new role, junior portfolio assistant, no title, no office, just the work. It wasn't meant to humiliate her. It was meant to offer her what she'd never offered anyone else: a second chance. She chose to stay. The elevator opened and I saw her step out, wearing flats instead of stilettos, a simple navy blazer instead of the designer dresses she once favored. Her face was pale, her jaw set like stone. "Catherine," she said stiffly. "Chairwoman." I stood from behind my desk. "Miss Chen from compliance will be training you this week. You'll be reviewing asset allocations and rebuilding mid-risk portfolios." She didn't answer. "And Natalie," I added gently, "you'll be seated in the bullpen." Her eyes flicked. "With the analysts." "With the team," I corrected. "You'll learn more from them now than you ever did from the boardroom." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Eventually, she gave a short nod and turned to leave. There was no dramatic scene, no public argument, just a young woman walking toward humility and, hopefully, eventually, growth. I didn't watch her go. Instead, I sat down and pulled up the internal audit reports. We had just approved a return-to-work program for staff over 55. We were also reworking the mentorship structure so that experience was no longer hidden behind closed doors, but brought forward as an asset. 2 days later, I received a letter, handwritten, on thick linen paper. It was from Monica Del Rey. "Dear Catherine, I just wanted to say thank you, not just for bringing me back, but for proving that people like us still matter." My granddaughter told her class I was a vice president again and drew a picture of me in a cape. "I haven't cried like that in years. You didn't just restore our titles, you restored our dignity." I kept that letter in my desk drawer, not as a trophy, as a compass, because, in a world that was sprinting toward whatever was next, I wanted to be someone who remembered what came before, the shoulders we stood on, the hands that held the ladder steady while others climbed. BRXLER was becoming that kind of place again, and I was making sure it stayed that way. That Sunday, my daughter Claire invited me over for dinner. She lived in a modest brownstone in Brooklyn, with ivy climbing the fence and chalk drawings on the sidewalk out front. Her husband, Jeremy, was grilling in the backyard. But peace, if you've stayed with me this long, thank you. This story wasn't just about a company, or a chair in a boardroom, or a promotion long overdue. It was about something deeper. It was about worth, because the truth is, there will come a time when someone looks at you and decides quietly, or blatantly, that you've outlived your usefulness, that your gray hairs mean slower thoughts, that your silence means weakness, that your age is a liability. But let me be clear. Wisdom is not a flaw, experience is not a burden, and your quiet strength the kind you've earned through decades of endurance. Failure, rising, learning, and showing up when no one clapped for you is the most underestimated force in the world. I was fired because they thought I was done. I bought the company to remind them I was just getting started. And now I walk through the halls of that same building with no bitterness, just purpose. I mentor those who are told to be louder to be heard. I protect those whose contributions are hidden behind cubicles and job titles that don't shine on LinkedIn. I make room at the table not just for myself, but for every Rosa, every Monica, every Peter. And I watch my grandson Ethan build cities out of cardboard and courage. I tell him bedtime stories where the hero is an old woman who doesn't swing a sword but carries a clipboard, wears sensible shoes, and defeats dragons with patience, truth, and the occasional well-timed spreadsheet. And he always asks, "Is that hero real?" I always answer the same way: "She's more real than you know." Now I'm curious about you, the one listening to my story. Have you ever been pushed aside because of your age, your quiet voice, or your kindness mistaken for weakness? What would you have done in my place? Leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels. And if you want more stories like this, real ones, about resilience, quiet revenge, and dignity earned. The hard way click on one of the videos on your screen now. You might be surprised at what strength really looks like. Thank you for being here. Until next time. Catherine. She lived in a modest brownstone in Brooklyn, with ivy climbing the fence and chalk drawings on the sidewalk out front. Her husband Jeremy was grilling in the backyard, and their son, my grandson Ethan, was running barefoot through the grass, chasing a paper plane he'd folded himself. I hadn't told them the full story yet. They knew I'd been let go. They didn't know I was now chair of the board of the company that fired me, because some victories, I've learned, are better shared after the dust settles, not in the heat of the moment. Mom, Claire said as she handed me a glass of lemonade. You look different, lighter. I smiled. I feel it. Did something happen? Let's just say, I said, sipping slowly. Some people are learning what happens when you mistake silence for weakness. Claire raised an eyebrow but didn't press later. After dinner, Ethan crawled into my lap, still smelling like sunscreen and peanut butter. Grandma, he whispered, are you retired now? I paused. Double quotes. No, sweetheart, I said. I'm just getting started again. He looked up, eyes wide. Are you building stuff? I smiled. I'm fixing something that someone else broke, making it good again. He seemed satisfied with that answer. I like that, he said, yawning. Fixing things is what superheroes do. And then he fell asleep against my shoulder. Claire watched us from across the room, her eyes glistening. You know, she said softly, after they let you go, I was so angry I couldn't sleep. I wanted to call the newspapers, blast them on social media. I laughed gently. You've always been the fire, but you, she continued, you disappear for a few weeks and come back ... glowing. What did you do, Mom? I looked down at Ethan's tiny fingers curled against mine. I made sure they remembered who I was, I said, but more importantly I reminded myself. And that was the truth, because for all the policies I changed, the people I reinstated, the systems I repaired, none of it meant anything if I didn't reclaim the thing they tried to take from me, my belief in myself. Monday morning, I returned to the office early. I still liked being the first one in. There was a quiet dignity in those early hours, the way the city stretched awake beneath my window, how the lights flickered on one floor at a time like slow dominoes of purpose. Helen, my new executive assistant, formerly a senior admin who had been unfairly sidelined by Natalie's realignment, knocked gently and entered with a clipboard and a shy smile. Morning, Chairwoman Hayes. Please, I said. Just, Catherine. She nodded. You have a meeting at 10 with the mentorship program leads. Also, there's someone from custodial who left a note for you this morning. I think you'll want to read it. She handed me a simple folded sheet of notebook paper. The handwriting was shaky, the ink slightly smudged. Dear Ms. Hayes, I've worked in this building 22 years. Nobody ever learned my name until last week, when you stopped in the hallway and asked me how my grandson was doing. You remembered his name was Lucas, that he was applying for scholarships. No one's ever done that. I don't know what they used to call you upstairs, but down here, they call you La Señora con Corazón, the lady with the heart. Thank you for making us feel seen. Rosa M. I read the note twice, folded it carefully, slipped it into the same drawer that held Monica's letter, because this was why I came back. For the titles, not for the corner office. But to make sure that people like Rosa, people who make everything work quietly, in the shadows, felt the light to . At 10 o'clock, I walked into the mentorship meeting and sat with a group of employees, young, old, some fresh out of grad school, others seasoned veterans with gray at their temples. The goal was simple: pair wisdom with energy, create a culture where experience wasn't just tolerated but treasured. Let's be honest, I said as we began, this industry's been pretending that aging is a weakness. They nodded. But what if we reframed it? What if we taught our teams that aging is a strategic advantage? Silence, then a smile, then a ripple of quiet applause. One of the brighted and brilliant raised her hand. I want to learn from someone who's failed, who's gotten back up, not just someone who's never made a mistake. I grinned. Then you'll learn a lot from me. And the room laughed, not because it was a joke, but because it was true. Autumn arrived. Quietly, leaves dusted the sidewalks, in copper and gold, and the morning air held that crisp clarity that made even bad coffee taste like something meaningful. Brexler Capital. My Brexler was changing, too. The walls were still glass and steel, but the culture inside had softened. I saw young analysts sitting beside gray-haired mentors during lunch, I heard laughter in the break room again. I saw client portfolios stabilize, then grow not just in size, but in trust. And more importantly, people walked into this building no longer afraid of becoming too old to matter. One morning, I stepped into the lobby just as Rosa, the janitor who'd written me that note, was finishing her shift. She smiled when she saw me and nodded toward the back hallway. "Someone left you a gift," she said in Spanish. I followed her gesture and found it a canvas, framed, painted with soft, confident strokes. It was a woman's silver hair tied in a bun, standing at the head of a table, surrounded by younger faces, all looking at her with open admiration. Underneath it was a hand-painted phrase: "Wisdom doesn't retire, it leads." No signature, no note. Just a quiet acknowledgement from someone who had seen what I had tried to do. I hung it in the hallway outside my office, not for clients, not for ego, but for the employees. For every person who needed to remember their worth when the world told them their time had passed. That evening, I walked home. I could have taken a car, or the subway, but something about walking, feeling the pavement beneath my feet, the rhythm of the city against my body, reminded me of where I'd come from, of who I was before the corner office, before the board votes, before the betrayal. Just a woman who worked hard, who showed up, who stayed late and stood tall, even when her knees shook. At a red light, I passed a young woman in a navy pantsuit, scrolling through emails on her phone. She looked up just as I passed, paused, and said, "Excuse me, are you Catherine Hayes?" I turned. "I am. I just wanted to say, I read about what you did at Brexva. It made me rethink everything." I raised an eyebrow. "Everything?" She smiled. "I've been trying to act like I belong by pretending to be perfect, but maybe I just need to be real, honest, human." I nodded slowly. "That's where the power is." She grinned. "I believe that now." Then the light changed, and she disappeared into the crowd. And I stood there a moment longer, beneath the city lights, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not power, not victory,